This is an Introduction to English Grammar, Part 12, Pronouns. My name is Karen, and this is for a class given at the University of Utah. Take a look at these sentences, see if there's anything that you would change. The first group, I like Mario, and Mario is a good dancer. Second group, Jay gave Sarah his car, Jay also gave Sarah his house. Third group, Cheryl got into Cheryl's car. Notice how we use the name more than once in these sentences. That's kind of unusual for us to do in standard English. In fact, we don't like to use the same word over and over. This is one of the places where we can use pronouns. So today we're going to explore personal pronouns, possessive pronouns, reflective pronouns, reciprocal pronouns, and some prescriptive rules about pronouns. We use pronouns to stand in place for other things in the discourse. Personal pronouns are marked for case in English. We're going to talk a little bit more about case, but basically that's what their grammatical role is in the sentence, whether they're the subject or the object. There's also some disagreement about how we should use a pronoun for unknown third person singular or plural for if we don't know the gender. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. Let's take a look at some pronouns that stand in for noun phrases. So we've already learned about noun phrases and what those are. Here are some examples where we can use pronouns in place of the noun phrase. John has 2 daughters. He reads to them every night. So here we're using he and them to stand in for John and his 2 daughters. Okay? Jay gave Sarah his car. He also gave her his house. Narcissus loved himself. When we have a pronoun that stands in for the place of a noun, the noun that it refers to is called the antecedent. Okay? Pronouns are supposed to agree with their antecedents in gender and number. Go ahead and take a look at these sentences and see if you can identify the antecedents of the underlined sentences. You can pause the video if you want to. The answers are on the next slide. Go ahead and take a look at the answers. Notice that some of the sentences don't have an antecedent, meaning that the antecedent would have to be obtained from other parts of the discourse or from some other context in the speech. It's important that the antecedents agree with the pronouns. This is a sentence that was found on the website of the Marriott Library a few years ago, and it says, "Please help the Marriott Library reduce their postage charges. Register your email address with the circulation department." And then it gives some instructions. Okay, what is the pronoun here in this sentence? We have the pronoun there, which agrees with the antecedent Marriott Library. Or does it? Is the Marriott Library singular or plural? So in this case, it should be something like, please help the Marriott Library reduce its, because it's a non-human thing, help the Marriott Library reduce its postage charges. So here we have an example of non-agreement between the pronoun and the antecedent. This is the most standard type or most common type of pronoun mistakes that people make. Pronouns are distinguished by person, number, and purpose, and sometimes gender and case. Okay? Personal pronouns are the pronouns you're probably most familiar with. They stand in for people, places, things, and ideas. They come in either subjective, objective, or possessive case. We already know what subject and object means. Possessive we've also talked about a little bit as well, but we'll see that quite a bit more in this chapter on pronouns. So possessive means that it belongs to me, okay, or belongs to something. You might know these cases by other names: nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. Genitive is the possessive case. Let's take a look at the pronoun paradigm in English. Okay, if the personal pronoun is in subject position, so the subject of the sentence, then we use these forms. Here are some examples. I love chocolate. Did you eat that whole thing? They were very surprised. So this is when it's in subjective case or in subject position. When the pronoun occurs in objective case or in object position, which means either the direct object, indirect object, or object of a preposition, these are the forms that are used in standard English. Here are some examples. That guy really hates you. Julie bought him a book. Sam likes to talk about them. Okay, it would be ungrammatical if we use the subjective case in place of the objective case here. So if we said something like, Julie bought he a book, our mental grammar and our prescriptive grammar tells us that that is not standard usage. One exception that we have to this rule about using objective case has to do with the preposition than. We've already seen this rule that has to do with, that than is an ellipted version of a longer sentence. So we use the subjective case in this case, he is taller than I, instead of he is taller than me. The analogy is used to say that it should really be he is taller than I am tall. Okay, we've already seen that before in chapter 1 and 2 of our book. Okay. However, it is quite common for English speakers to use the objective version. In fact, when we use the subjective version, we often feel like that's kind of too formal for our needs. Here's a tricky part about pronouns. When we don't know what the gender is of someone in the third person, it's a struggle for us to know which pronoun to use. So check out these two sentences. The university received a generous donation from an anonymous donor. Blank gave more than $1 million for the new library. How do we fill this in? Prescriptive rules many years ago used to say that we always put in he, and that when we put in he, our brains would determine that it was not specific to male gender, that we could both interpret that as male or female donor. Since we don't know who the donor is, there isn't a way that we can decide whether it's he or she. We have a few options here. So one option is that we could say the university received a generous donation from an anonymous donor. He or she gave more than $1 million. That's one option. Another option would be to use either he or she. Okay. I guess we could use it gave more than $1 million to the new library, but that seems to have a feeling that it's not really a human. Okay. Many people in English, not in standard prescriptive English, but in English, use the plural form they. So something like the university received a generous donation from an anonymous donor. They gave more than $1 million for the new library. But the prescriptive rules say that the pronoun must agree with the antecedent in number and gender. So in this case, we have a singular antecedent with a plural pronoun. And that many prescriptive rules say that that is a violation of standard English. The prescription is changing on this particular subject, though, and so you definitely have to consult your style guide. We've seen recently that the Washington Post now accepts they as a singular pronoun, and some other newspapers have as well. So it's something that is changing or fluctuating in our language. Think about it as well when you see a newborn baby and you're not sure if it's a little girl or a little boy. And so you say, oh, I love your baby. It's he, she, it's so cute. Again, it's really hard to determine which pronoun we should use there. So it's definitely a change in progress in English language. Let's take a look at some possessives. So remember, the possessive has to do with ownership. Okay? When it's in the determiner position, that means that it comes before the noun, then we use these. So the examples here, my dog is the smartest on the planet. Is that your checkbook? My mother really likes their garden. My mother really likes her garden. Okay? Possessive pronouns, the second way we can have them is when they act as a subject or a complement all by themselves. So now they're not accompanying a noun, but instead they are the noun phrase. So that dish rag is mine. Theirs is the one on the right. Okay? So like in answer to the question, which house is theirs? Well, theirs is the one on the right. Okay? It's important for you to know that only third-person pronouns are distinguished by gender. Okay? And we talk about 3 possible genders, but it turns out to be more like 2 genders and then one that's the non-human, non-gender specific. So even when I talk about my dog, which is non-human, I actually use the pronoun her to talk about her because she's female. Okay. Second person pronouns have the same form in singular and plural. Historically, the plural form was adopted as the singular. There used to be a different singular form for you. Okay. English has almost completely lost the formal-informal distinction, so what we call the tu-vu distinction in second person pronouns. And there are many non-standard second-person plural pronouns. In the United States, we often hear people trying to distinguish between you, meaning one person, or you, meaning many people, and we might say something like you guys, y'all, yous, yuns. There are lots of different ways we describe that. Even in some places in the South, we might say y'all, y'all, okay? Y'all or all y'all. Native speakers of English don't usually have a problem deciding on which pronoun forms to use when the pronoun is by itself, meaning that we don't have trouble deciding whether it should be subjective case or objective case or possessive case. However, when we join two pronouns together, we sometimes have trouble distinguishing now which case it should be when it comes second. So here we have this example of did you make that cookie for, and let's put in the first person personal pronoun. Okay, so I would have to make a choice between did you make that cookie for I or did you make that cookie for me? And we know, or most of you, your mental grammar should tell you that it should be the objective case here. And it should be, did you make that cookie for me? When we put in another noun phrase and we coordinate the two with the word and, we start to have trouble deciding which one it should be. So here we have the sentence, Jill called and left a message for John and again, choose whether or not we put in I or whether we put in me. Okay? Jill called and left a message for John and prescriptive rules say that it should be me. Okay? For some of you, your mental grammar may flag that and say, ooh, no, it should always be John and I. That actually is a hypercorrection, where we've been told to correct so many times in the subjective case that we over-apply the rule to the objective case. We know that it should be the object of a preposition here, and so the pronoun should be an objective case. So the correct prescriptive way to say it would be, Jill called and left a message for John and me. Okay. Prescriptive rules indicate that the choice of the pronoun is based on its grammatical role, so whether it's the subject or object. Okay. Prescriptive rules consider the components of a coordinated phrase to be the same as if they were not coordinated. One strategy for native speakers to make these choices is to remove the coordination. Okay. Jill called and left a message for John and blank. If I take out John and, then it's easier for me to make that decision between I or me, because most of us would not say Jill called and left a message for I. We would say Jill called and left a message for me. So that tells us that even when it's coordinated, it should be Jill called and left a message for John and me. Okay, go ahead and take a look at these sentences and fill in some of the pronouns for the information that you've been given. Okay, use the information at the end of the sentence, first person singular, to decide which one you should do for whether it should be subjective case or objective case. Okay, let's take a look at these. So the first one, you and I should definitely go to the movies because we're in subjective case. There have been bad feelings between Sarah and him, because we're third person singular male, and we're in the objective case because it's the object of the preposition between. Okay? Between you and me, neither John nor I liked her cooking much, or neither John nor she liked her cooking much. So third person plural, neither John nor they. So this one's another tricky one, but here we have, again in the subject position, John nor they liked her cooking much. Again, if you take away John nor, you would say, between you and me, they liked her cooking much, or they didn't like her cooking much. It's easy to do it when we take away the coordination. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about reflexive pronouns. Reflexive pronouns end in self or selves. Okay? There are 3 times when we use reflexive pronouns. When the subject and object are the same person or same entity, same thing, same person, same people. Okay? The second reason is to provide contrast, like as in the island itself is calm, but the surrounding areas are dangerous. So we're providing contrast in the sentence. And the third one is when it carries the meaning of alone, like all by yourself, or without accompaniment. So I painted my house by myself, or I painted my house myself. This is the paradigm for reflexive pronouns. You can see how it lines up and where those pronouns should be when they are singular or plural. Okay, let's talk a little bit about hypercorrection. Look at these examples with the reflexive pronouns and ask yourself if they are prescriptively correct or incorrect. Here we have, please give the report to John and myself. Jenny and myself think that's an excellent idea. Okay. Many people use reflexive pronouns here. In fact, we often see it across gender lines that one gender uses these more than the other. But in both of these cases, it's not correct to use the reflexive pronoun because reflexive pronouns only happen for 3 reasons, and these 2 sentences don't have one of those reasons. So they should just be a regular pronoun. Reciprocal pronouns are used to indicate mutual effect between people or among people. The children kissed themselves. That's reflexive. Okay? The children kissed each other. That's reciprocal. Reciprocal means that it's not happening to myself, but that it's happening between a group of us, okay? Or between 2 of us. The reciprocal pronoun forms are each other and one another. Okay? Each other and one another. Native speakers of English don't have strong feelings about which one is appropriate in certain contexts, meaning that there was a distinction, but it's going away. These rules for how we decide which pronoun to use is based on an archaic or old singular, dual, plural distinction, which doesn't really exist in very many places in English anymore. Okay? We only have 2 numbers. We have singular and plural. But we used to have a 3-way distinction where we had one group of pronouns and sometimes even verbs for singular, one group for 2, and one group for more than 2, so 3 or more. Some forms in English still reflect this distinction. Reciprocal pronouns are one of those. So another one of those is between and among. Okay? Between and among is used to reflect a number distinction. Between was supposed to only be for dual objects, while among was for plural objects. So there is no understanding between him and me. Notice the objective use of me because it comes after the preposition between, okay? Instead of the subjective I, okay? Which sometimes we hypercorrect and say there is no understanding between he and I. Which is grammatically incorrect according to prescriptivists. And then the second one, there are several talented people among your friends. So between is used when we're talking about 2 people, among is used when we're talking about more than 2 people. Contemporary English preserves the dual use of between to some extent, but among seems to be acceptable for either place. Okay? John and Mary have a lot of secrets among them. So even though we only have 2 people there, it seems like among is acceptable there, even though according to prescriptive rules, it's not. Prescriptive rules for reciprocal pronouns are pretty much the same. So each other is supposed to be for dual antecedents, where we have 2 people, and one another is for plural antecedents. So Bob and George dislike each other. Okay? Reciprocal between 2 people. The 3 sisters are devoted to one another. So now we're reciprocal among more than 2 people. Okay? However, investigations of current English use says that speakers make this choice for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with prescription. English speakers use each other more often and more flexibly than one another. So we often use each other in both cases. But according to prescriptive rules, this is the way they should be broken down. So what does this do for me? Well, you can impress your friends at parties by sharing your knowledge of the English pronoun system with them. It does help you to avoid hypercorrection with those forms. So we've talked about the coordinated personal pronouns and reflexives. I often get corrected when I use the prescriptive form between him and me. Often people correct me and say, no, it's supposed to be between he and I. And so there's a lot of confusion on what is actually correct there, or their understanding of English grammar. And you can use your knowledge of the singular, dual, plural distinction to make some prescriptive decisions about how you're going to use certain words. Okay. You can also use your knowledge of pronoun cases to make decisions in these sentences. So here we have another example of the objective case. So either between you and me, I think he's lying, or between you and I think he's lying. Again, in both cases, it's supposed to be the object of a preposition, the preposition between, and so it should be the objective case and not the subjective case of I. Okay. The last thing that I want you to be aware of is that you need to understand that this dilemma of the gender-neutral pronoun doesn't have one specific standard prescription. We're going to be following what our book says, which is that we should not use the word they to refer to a singular antecedent, even when we don't know the gender. And so our exams will be given that way. But that is a shift that's happening in English. And you may decide for yourself to use whichever one of those you feel most comfortable with. When I meet someone who I'm not sure of what their gender is, or maybe they don't have an expressed gender, I always ask them what pronoun they would like me to use, and try to follow that.